Russian President Vladimir Putin's Ukraine invasion just suffered a serious body blow. While Putin had hoped that the supply of U.S.-made weapons into Ukraine would slow down following former U.S. President Joe Biden's tenure, he's just been hit hard by something he never could have expected. Scores of U.S.-made missiles are about to head into Ukraine, showcasing that U.S. support for its ally is still strong, despite all of Vladimir's attempts to manipulate the narrative. On May 11th, both United 24 Media and the Kyiv Independent reported that the U.S. has approved a massive shipment of more than 200 missiles to Ukraine. This shipment includes 100 Patriot interceptor missiles and 125 long-range artillery rockets, possibly GMLRs or even ATACMS, though the exact system has not been publicly confirmed. It's a bumper package that renews Ukraine's missile stockpiles at a time when it's also working on developing a domestic defense industry capable of creating missiles with similar capabilities for its troops. Did President Donald Trump approve this transfer? No. According to United 24, the transfer was actually approved under the Biden administration last year. The missiles will also not be coming directly from the United States. Instead, they are U.S.-made but owned by Germany, which will route them through its own channels before handing them over to Ukraine. That raises an interesting question. If these weapons were owned by European countries, why did the U.S. have to approve the transfer in the first place? Surely those countries can do what they like with their American-made missiles once they have them. That isn't the case. No country can export U.S.-made missiles, even systems like the Patriot or long-range artillery rockets, without the U.S. signing off on the transfer. That's because U.S. arms export laws require government approval before American-made weapons can be re-exported, even by allied countries. The reason is often linked to broader concerns about proliferation, including agreements like the Missile Technology Control Regime, or MTCR. Originally implemented to enable the U.S. and its group of 7 compatriots to control the transfer of nuclear-capable ballistic missiles, the MTCR is a multilateral export control program that now has 35 partners. India was the latest to join in 2016, though the MTCR is an informal regime that relies on voluntary participation. The MTCR comes down to control and responsibility. The U.S. wants to ensure that its missiles are always where they're supposed to be, without having to worry about them falling into the hands of a potential enemy. For instance, imagine that the U.S. sold ATACMS missiles to a country, only to have that nation turn around and decide it wants to sell those missiles to Russia or China. That's bad news for the U.S. Not only would one of its enemies get its hands on a powerful weapon, but that nation's military tech specialists would be able to reverse engineer what they've just bought. That would inevitably lead to a U.S. enemy being able to produce a rip-off of an original U.S. weapon, often far more cheaply than the U.S. can build that original. The U.S. can't allow that to happen. That's why the MTCR exists. In the past, the MTCR outright banned the transfer of Category 1 weapons once they'd been sold to another country. That category includes long-range ballistic missile systems, under which the ATACMS falls, and unmanned aerial missile systems like cruise missiles and drones. However, President Biden updated U.S. policy on MTCR implementation after Putin invaded Ukraine, creating a national security memorandum that allows the transfers of Category 1 systems like ATACMS as long as the U.S. signs off on the actions first. In a press release, the White House claimed that the amendment would advance non-proliferation goals and bolster allied defense capabilities. The first claim is debatable. Critics, such as the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, point out that enabling the transfer of powerful weapons systems is the opposite of advancing non-proliferation. They have a point. A country like Ukraine, which may never have purchased ATACMS or Patriot missiles before Russia invaded, now has access to advanced missile technology. Though Ukraine likely isn't reverse engineering the missiles it receives, the mere fact that it's learning how to use them and the basics of how they work could, and likely will, lead to it building more missiles in the future. That's a sacrifice the U.S. is willing to make for the second claim, bolstering allied defense capabilities. Here, the argument is simple. Ukraine is being invaded by a far larger nation, especially in military terms. With the Patriot and potentially ATACMS, it's more able to defend itself against that invasion and conduct attacks against its enemy that weaken its military's ability to take Ukraine's territory. Even though the long-range artillery rockets in the shipment are not yet confirmed to be ATACMS, The MTCR still helps explain why the nations transferring these missiles needed U.S. approval. That leads to another question. Just what is Ukraine getting its hands on with this shipment of more than 200 missiles? The specific type of long-range rockets in the shipment hasn't been confirmed. Some analysts believe they are likely GMLRs, guided multiple launch rocket system rockets, which are launched from HIMARS and can strike targets up to about 56 miles away. These rockets are guided, accurate, and ideal for hitting Russian artillery and logistics targets near the front. However, it's also possible that some of the rockets could be longer-range variants or even ATACMS, which Ukraine has used in the past. If these rockets include ATACMS, then Ukraine would be receiving additional units of a system it has already used effectively since 2024. For several years, the U.S. would approve the transfer of these missiles but didn't allow Ukraine's forces to use them on Russian territory. It was believed that doing so would lead to an escalation of the Ukraine war, crossing one of Putin's red lines, and potentially increasing the risk of a nuclear response from Russia. Eventually, the U.S. relented. In November 2024, Biden finally approved the use of U.S.-made ATACMS weapons in Russian territory, likely because the U.S. thought the invasion had escalated to the point where such approval was warranted. Ukraine wasted no time in making use of its new weapon. By November 19th, about a day after news hit of Biden's approval, Ukraine used 6 ATACMS to hit targets in the border region of Bryansk. Russia wasn't happy. It claimed that Ukraine would never have gained this capability without U.S. help. However, the escalation that so many feared never came, and Ukraine has been using ATACMS to conduct strikes on Russian targets ever since. And that makes sense. ATACMS is an extremely powerful missile. Though often referred to as a long-range missile in the context of the Ukraine war, ATACMS is a short-range ballistic missile. That won't matter to Ukraine because ATACMS is capable of traveling between 99 and 186 miles, depending on the variant being delivered. That range is high enough for Ukraine to target several key Russian facilities. The Institute for the Study of War says that around 245 targets fall within the missile's range, including 16 air bases. The rest of the known objects Ukraine could hit range from storage facilities to weapons manufacturing plants. ATACMS also moves fast and hits hard. The missile can reach Mach 3 when it's in the air, reaching a top speed of about 2,300 miles per hour, which makes it incredibly difficult for Russia's aerial defense systems to take out. As for the punch-it packs, each ATACMS can be loaded with a warhead weighing up to approximately 1,300 pounds, again depending on the variant. While the missile was originally developed to replace the nuclear-capable MGM-52 Lance, ATACMS itself has only ever been deployed with conventional warheads. Ukraine has no nuclear warheads it could load into the missile. That's likely why the U.S. approved Ukraine's use of it on Russian territory. The U.S. can argue that Ukraine is simply using the missile as a high-powered option compared to its other missiles and drones, and that ATACMS poses no nuclear threat to Russia when wielded by Ukraine. This combination of speed and power already makes ATACMS a terrifying prospect for Putin. However, it's the missile's guidance system that may be the real highlight, and the main reason why Russia doesn't want to see the U.S. transferring 125 of the weapons to Ukraine. ATACMS uses a combination of GPS tracking and an inertial navigation system, or INS, to strike a target with deadly precision while minimizing collateral damage. The GPS calculates the missile's current position using signals received from an array of satellites. During the majority of the missile's flight, this tracking data is used to ensure the missile is en route to its target, and, in some cases, could also be used to adjust the missile's trajectory. As for the INS, this combines gyroscopes and accelerometers to track motion and orientation. Jamming and other forms of electrical interference aren't possible because ATACMS INS doesn't rely on any external systems. All calculations are done within the missile itself, ensuring that missile position, speed, and altitude are all maintained appropriately in real time. To simplify things, if Ukraine wants to destroy a Russian target, this powerful guidance system almost guarantees that it'll score a direct hit as long as Russia isn't able to shoot the ATACMS out of the skies. ATACMS can be fired from both the M270 multiple launch rocket system and the portable M142 HIMARS. The latter are likely going to be the delivery vectors for this latest batch of ATACMS, as Ukraine has around 40 HIMARS. It's been using throughout the war to target everything from Russian artillery to military facilities. In short, whether the shipment includes ATACMS or long-range GMLRs, Either system will magnify the country's attacking threat. Ukraine will be smart about how it uses these powerful weapons. Look for key facilities in Crimea and the Russian border regions to be targeted. In particular, ATACMS may allow Ukraine to strike weapons and logistical facilities that are supporting Russia's recent attempts to build pressure on Ukraine in the country's northeast. Then, there are the Patriot missiles. While ATACMS and GMLRs are designed for offensive strikes, Patriot is all about taking out incoming Russian threats before they touch down on Ukrainian soil. As Action on Armed Violence points out, these sophisticated missiles can take out drones and Russian ballistic missiles. That's made the handful of Patriot missile batteries Ukraine has vital in defending its electrical grids, both civilian and military infrastructure, and even hospitals and other civilian facilities that Putin has been happy to target throughout his invasion. We don't know which variant of the Patriot missiles Ukraine will be receiving, though most will likely be the PAC-3. As the name implies, these missiles are an upgrade over the older PAC-2S, with their effectiveness against ballistic missile threats being increased via the use of more advanced hit-to-kill technology. Each PAC-3 has a missile guidance system that enables it to both track a target in the skies and, upon impact, release a massive amount of kinetic energy that decimates its target in the skies. Ukraine can also load up to 16 of these missiles into a single launcher, which is a massive upgrade over the 4 missiles per launcher that is possible with the PAC-2. How Stuff Works notes that Patriot missiles are somewhat similar to Stinger missiles, the latter of which are fired from shoulder-mounted rocket launchers. However, where a Stinger uses an infrared seeker that allows it to lock onto an aircraft's heat source, such as its engine exhaust, a Patriot makes use of ground-based radars to watch, track, and engage targets. A Patriot battery can track a target up to 50 miles away before launching a volley of missiles that take the target out long before it's even visible to the human eye from the ground. The PAC-3 specifically can strike a target at a range of 12 to 22 miles, meaning a Patriot battery's radar systems have about 25 miles of travel to determine where an incoming threat is going before the missile is launched. The PAC-3 employs a hit-to-kill mechanism, relying on kinetic energy that destroy targets with a minimal lethality enhancer. The missiles are 17 feet long, have 10-inch diameters, and weigh about 688 pounds. And like the ATACMS, Patriot missiles combine their power with almost ridiculous speed. It takes less than a second for a PAC-3 to reach supersonic speeds after being launched, with the missile being capable of hitting Mach 5 by the time it reaches its target. Ukraine is about to get 100 of these powerful missiles as part of the new US-approved package. That will likely leave Putin fuming. He's been using ballistic missiles to create terror among Ukraine's civilians, most recently with an attack against Sumy on April 13th. That strike, which involved 2 missiles, killed 34 people and injured over 100 more. It's also an attack that Ukraine might have been able to prevent if it had more Patriot missiles ready to go. Now, it has those missiles. Even more worrying for Putin is that this missile transfer follows on from Trump giving the go-ahead for the US to start selling weapons and other services directly to Ukraine. For example, May 3rd brought with it confirmation that the US had approved a $310.5 million sale of F-16 training and support services to Ukraine. The package includes several aircraft modifications and upgrades to make Ukraine's F-16S more dangerous, in addition to spare parts, consumables, and training for both pilots and F-16 support crew. There are no weapons in the package, but now that the US is approving missile transfers and selling to Ukraine, it'll likely only be a matter of time before we see those types of sales. The U.S. Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency even released a statement about the sale, saying, "The proposed sale aligns with the objectives of the U.S. foreign policy and national security by enhancing the capabilities of a key partner, contributing to political stability and economic progress in Europe. It also supports the broader international coalition effort to integrate F-16 platforms into the Ukrainian Air Force." Translation: the U.S. is looking for more ways to make Ukraine stronger than ever before. That leads to what this latest weapons transfer really means for Putin and his Ukraine invasion. First, and most importantly, the missile transfer acts as more evidence that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has succeeded in bringing the U.S. onto Ukraine's side. That hasn't always been certain since President Trump took office. Under Biden, support from the U.S. was guaranteed, even if internal political wrangling sometimes led to that support coming later than Ukraine would have liked. With Trump, Ukraine has had to deal with a roller coaster of a relationship that has at times appeared to indicate that the US was no longer supporting the country. The temporary suspension of military aid and intelligence sharing in March seemed to point toward the US becoming more sympathetic to Putin, as did past claims Trump made about Zelensky supposedly being a dictator and Ukraine being responsible for the war. Putin would have loved all of that. Each action would have been proof to Russia's leader that his attempts to manipulate the US were working. At the very least, he was able to weaken Ukraine geopolitically, which led to Putin growing more confident that he could see his invasion through to his desired conclusion. But Trump's allowing the transfer of over 200 of the most important missiles Ukraine has been using showcases a complete turnaround. The US president could have blocked the approval of this transfer issued under Biden. He didn't. Instead, what's being seen now is one of several recent signs that the US is all in on supporting Ukraine through its war. Does this mean Trump has given up on his efforts to negotiate peace between Russia and Ukraine? No. But the transfer of these missiles, along with the F-16 parts, demonstrates that the Trump administration is going to side with Ukraine if Putin doesn't agree to a ceasefire. Beyond those weapons transfers and sales, Russia also has to deal with the fact that the US has finally agreed on a minerals deal with Ukraine. Putin knew that the deal was coming. He didn't know how favorable it would be to Ukraine. The initial draft of the minerals deal seemed to play right into Russia's hands, especially as the US seemed to be demanding $500 billion in repayment for the military aid it had provided during the previous 3 years. Obviously, Ukraine said no to that version of the deal. The new version, which was agreed on in early May, is far more beneficial to Ukraine. It's taking the form of an investment fund into which the US, Ukraine, and Ukraine's other allies can invest. Ukraine maintains 50% ownership over the future revenues generated by its vast mineral reserves and will benefit from US workers entering the country. That alone is something of a security guarantee, even if the US stopped short of putting a more concrete guarantee in place. That deal suggests that the US is looking toward a future where Ukraine is still a sovereign nation, something that Putin absolutely doesn't want. Combine that with Trump's May 9th threat to impose sanctions on Russia if Putin doesn't come to an extended ceasefire deal, and you get plenty of signs that the tide is turning. The US backs Ukraine. It backs the country so much that it's approving the transfer of weapons, even as Trump seeks peace and is forming deals and threatening Putin, because Russia isn't acting the way the US wants it to act. Putin's manipulation failed. Zelensky has Trump's support. Then there's the practical side of the missile transfer to consider. Ukraine has very limited supplies of ATACMS, GMLRS, and Patriot missiles. In the case of the latter, those low supplies are by necessity. As recently as February, Zelensky was highlighting that Ukraine was running short of Patriot missiles, with the country also unable to build its own because doing so would require a separate agreement with the US. One of the biggest problems Ukraine faces comes from Patriot missile production. In 2024, the U.S. built around 500 Patriot missiles, which represented a 30% increase over production from the previous year. If Ukraine had its way, all 500 of those missiles would be heading to its territory. They aren't. Instead, Ukraine has been forced to deal with holdups both on the countries agreeing to transfer Patriot missiles and the U.S. signing off. Those holdups happen because existing Patriot missile stockpiles are in such short supply that Ukraine's allies have to think long and hard about any donation of these powerful missiles that they make. Take Germany as an example. It's going to be routing the 100 Patriot missiles Ukraine is about to receive. The fact that Germany received the go-ahead to make an unprecedented $5 billion purchase of Patriot missiles back in August isn't a coincidence. Ukraine may never have received the Patriot missiles it's about to receive if that purchase wasn't approved. Germany simply couldn't afford to lose them. So, the fact that Ukraine is going to be getting such large quantities of Patriot missiles and offensive weapons like GMLRS or ATACMS is bad news for Putin. It's more proof, were any needed, that Europe likely sees Ukraine as the front line in what may evolve into a larger continent-wide war. Countries like Germany are weakening themselves in the short term to make Ukraine stronger because they know that Putin needs to be held back. Production of Patriot missiles is still slow. Around 600 will be built in 2025, which is 20% more than we saw in 2024. So, any large-scale transfer of these missiles to Ukraine sends the message to Putin that the West is serious about ending his expansionist war. Ultimately, Ukraine just got a lot stronger. It now has additional Patriot missiles to defend itself against the most dangerous weapons, short of nukes, that Russia can unleash, along with what's likely to be either ATACMS or GMLRs, which can be used to conduct precision strikes on Putin's positions. Are these missiles game changers? No, but they act as signs that the momentum is shifting in the Ukraine war, both on the ground and in the political domain. But what do you think about the U.S. decision to approve the transfer of more than 200 missiles to Ukraine? How do you think Ukraine will use its new Patriot missiles? What does this mean for Putin as he attempts to manipulate the narrative surrounding the Ukraine war? Share your thoughts with us in the comments, and remember to subscribe to the Hype Flow for more videos covering the latest developments in the Ukraine war, the Middle East, and other global conflicts.